Today's topic is a messy one. A lot of
Very
people,
messy.
A lot of people have opinions and ideas about feminism. And so you have this really unique sort of perspective. Your formal training is in philosophy, but you also have this appointment in gender and women's studies. And maybe a way of getting a handle on feminism rather than some broad abstract thing is to talk about how it works with,
I think that's great.
particularly with, say, something that people are interested and familiar with, like ethics.
Yes.
And you teach this course called Feminist Ethics, and one might say, feminist ethics? Well, wait a minute. You know, what's right and wrong isn't a function of being a man or a woman, is it? So what would feminist ethics be other than just ethics that apply to everyone?
One of the biggest misconceptions that people have about feminist ethics is that there is such a thing as feminist ethics, and there really isn't. And what you do, really, when you teach feminist ethics is you look at ethical theory from a feminist perspective. And what it means to look at ethics from a feminist perspective is to bring the feminist theory to bear. And so you're going to be working with notions of gender, what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, and some of the very basic concepts such as oppression and power and hierarchies and social structures and the notion of a narrative, that we have our identity socially constructed. What it is to be a man, well, there's all the myth of what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, all these narratives, myths, whatever you want to call them,
Norms,
stereotypes,
expectations, boxes.
Yes, narrative stories. And when you do feminist ethics, you take this whole feminist theory toolkit, the feminist lens, and you look at traditional Western ethical theory.
Okay, so traditional Western ethical theory would be things like duties and rights, things like utility, justice. Let's pick one that might be particularly appropriate for Wyoming. That is, and we've heard about this cowboy ethics thing, and that seems to make allusions to this notion of virtue.
Yes.
So how would the feminist lens, right, see virtue ethics?
Virtue ethics, very old, Aristotelian based. Virtue ethics is unique in that it is based on character rather than rightness or wrongness of actions. So with most traditional Western ethical theory, you look at the rightness or wrongness of actions. With virtue theory, you look at the character of the person performing the actions, and if it is a good person, then the actions they do are indirectly, therefore, good. The problem with virtue theory from a feminist perspective is what counts as a virtue. And you begin to learn to see that these accounts of virtue are very gender biased. And so there are assumptions about what it is to be a man. And so we have the manly virtues, what it is to be a woman, the womanly virtues, and they're different. And Aristotle would be fine with this because he thought there are virtues for being a shipbuilder, virtues for being a teacher,
slave, virtue
and all
for
these
being
things.
a soldier,
But it gets to be problematic when you want just the human virtues.
What is
And
it
then
to
they
be a
get to be split between man and woman. And it turns out that a lot of the manly virtues have to do with power and strength. And the womanly virtues have to do with
compassion, tenderness,
peacemaking, and caregiving. And this is actually part of what is recognized as feminist ethics, which is a type of care ethics, that women are the caregivers. And what's missing from traditional Western ethical theory is the notion that human beings need to work together and care about each other. And so you have these very abstract theories, like we must serve the greatest good for the greatest number. But what about just dialing it down, taking it to a more basic level, and human beings just caring about each other?
So the feminist view that caring should be a virtue is in line with sort of the female virtue, but the notion is that this should be a human virtue. That's the move?
Well, no. It should be. It irritates me that it's not. And this is where the feminists split. Because some feminists say what's missing from traditional Western ethical theory is this very human component. So some feminists go exactly the move you're taking, that this is what it is to be human.
Good person.
And other feminists say, no, this is exactly what it is to be a woman, and woman is different from man. And then a third group of feminists say to emphasize care is just to reinforce
to capitulate
these
to
negative
the stereotypes.
and it puts women back in a position of being a caretaker, which is a very subservient, dependent, put others ahead of yourself, sacrificial position. And so when we talk about feminist ethics, there is care ethics, but some feminists find that appalling.
It's out or it's shared.
And what you get primarily with feminist ethics, though, is a way of looking at any ethical theory and saying, where are the gender biases? Where are there socially constructive narratives that are being used to promote a social structure that is oppressive? And so when you talk about virtues, if the virtues are being used to oppress a group, then the feminists should object to those.
So it would the argument then be that putting the burden of caring on women is some would say that's the oppressive
That's
move.
the problem, yeah. There's a wonderful theory, and I cannot remember the name of the philosopher. I think it's Virginia Held. And she says care is so important that what we need to do is to disassociate the notion of care from women and make it a human virtue. And she suggests 2 years of mandatory civil service, but instead of it being military, it will be care-based.
Care-based.
And everyone grows up knowing they're going to spend 2 years
caring
for people.
Well, and that aligns with the virtues nicely, doesn't it?
And
Because we learn the virtues by practicing the virtues.
And we practice them and make it part of our character. And so that's one way that feminists have come up with of emphasizing care, but not having it be part of these negative stereotypes that are oppressive.
Right. Well, how about, so let's extend this one step further into Wyoming, and that is there's been talk and whatnot about the cowboy ethics, right? Of course, it's cowboy ethics, but...
and I don't think that's insignificant.
You don't think that's insignificant? So
it's not cow person.
What's the feminist lens show us about cowboy ethics, right? Because cowboy ethics are ride for the brand and independence and act with courage, right? So is there a story to be told here?
Yeah, the easiest one to pick out of all that is the notion of independence.
Okay.
And the idea of the individual and the rugged individual on their own, do things on their own, that actually is gendered.
But doesn't the cowboy ethic also include looking after the weak and taking care of others? I mean, isn't there...
There is that element in there, but...
It's kind of complicated there.
It is complicated, but what the feminist would say is when you have a theory that promotes individualism and somehow or another views any kind of confrontational approach to life, me against the world, and I'm going to protect the weak, it misses the idea that no one is an individual by themselves, which is a silly way of putting it, but that to be a person requires such a network, such a relation. And you come to be who you are because of the involvement of so many people, and that's what needs to be emphasized. And when you look at almost any account of traditional Western ethical theory, what you get is either it's confrontational or it's individual. And so the notion is of an punctuated individual. I am a discrete entity, and how I interact with others, that's what ethics is about, traditionally. And a feminist approach is this notion of an individual doesn't even make sense in so many ways, because what it is to be human, to be a person, is to be the result of all of these relationships. And when you really look at traditional Western ethical theory, you find that those theories depend hugely on the notion of an individual. And what the feminists bring, and what this is feminist critique of ethics, is the notion, the assumption that is underlying traditional ethical theory is in fact a false narrative. It's not what it is to be a person.
Well, I've got an idea. Maybe we'll finish with this. Maybe we should get together. You could get together with Gender and Women's Studies and propose an alternative of cowgirl ethics and see how that plays.
No.
Thanks anyway. And
You're getting me in trouble over that one.
I think it would be a fun exercise, but
No, we need cow person ethics.
I'm sorry. So, although I suppose
the cows might object. We just
maybe
need
that's
cow
it.
ethics. No, bad. It's kind of horribly astray.
Well, thanks so much for visiting with
This
me
was
and
fun.
clarifying what was very complicated and maybe complicating in the minds of some people what might have otherwise been very clear.
And probably any feminist listening to this will disagree with everything I have said. So it needs to be very clear this is me talking.
Thank you.
Thank you.